Okay, class, we are back with part 2 of 6.10 Challenges of Urban Changes. So we are going to be looking at the second half of this info, focusing on squatter settlements and conflicts over land tenure within large cities. Also, responses to economic and social challenges in urban areas can include inclusionary zoning and local food movements. Urban renewal and gentrification have both positive and negative effects. And also functional and geographic fragmentation of governments, essentially the way government agencies and institutions are dispersed between state, county, city, and neighborhood levels, can present challenges. So, one second. Squatter settlements. This is one result of urban changes and can definitely be a challenge. So these are residential areas that are situated on undesirable or abandoned land that are built with found materials not connected to city services. So like we've mentioned before, favelas, slums, places like that. Barrios. Rapid urbanization has resulted in conflict over land tenure. So basically, this is legal rights to land. Squatters, these are people that live in an area but that do not have legal rights in that area. They don't own that property or they're not paying rent on that property, and they can be evicted by government. So where these settlements pop up, that land belongs to maybe the government or some other people. Obviously, it's not being used by them. So people will start to create like their settlements here, and then they might be forced to move at some point. It can cause issues of homelessness and also of lack of affordable housing. So there's something called inclusionary zoning that is a response to some of these urban challenges. These are areas where city governments require that developers must include low and medium income housing options within their development projects in order to officially be able to get that building permit. So they can't just do like super fancy, exclusive, expensive high-rise buildings, right? They have to also have some, let's say, affordable units within that building, or maybe within that area, if they're developing that whole area, have affordable options as well. So basically, people who are working in urban areas are often not able to afford housing to live there because of high prices, right? Think about bid rent theory. This is common in the US, and also similar programs are utilized in London right now. This is not likely seen in periphery and semi-periphery areas, so countries that maybe are still developing. This is usually inclusionary zoning is being used in more like developed and westernized countries. We also see local food movements. We touched on this also in the agriculture unit. So basically, city-owned land or abandoned areas are being used to plant community gardens, urban gardens, also to help provide for fresh food, vegetables, fruit in that area. So they might use like the areas next to sidewalks or maybe lots that are cleared out so that way people can make community gardens. This is considered a local food movement. Also, it helps to create green spaces in that area. It can also create community, a sense of community, and also jobs in that area as well. Farmers markets are also tied to this. Urban renewal is another approach. So this is programming funded by federal government grants after World War II intended to redevelop and modernize blighted, abandoned, and or industrial urban areas. So we've kind of already touched on something similar to this, recreating an area to be then used for, I guess, like in a positive way. So think about housing, schools, all kinds of things to develop an area and improve the living conditions. So here we have a before and after of an example from Cincinnati. And this is just a little bit more additional information of this example in Cincinnati. So gentrification, this is a big one. I feel like every year they always ask something about gentrification. This is a process by which higher income residents or professional developers buy buildings in abandoned, blighted, or industrial areas for a low cost and renovate, restore, or rebuild property. So basically, a part of a city that's been seen as like being low income or maybe even sketchy or dangerous, developers will go in there and buy those properties on the cheap and then make them super nice, bring in some of those hipster coffee shops, and then boom, that area is gentrified. So make sure that you guys do try some of the Aspire to Do activities related to gentrification, because there's always some questions about it. My little pup is here. Similar to urban renewal, like that same kind of intention, but developers or residents are intending to flip these properties to be able to make a profit. So here we see an example of an area that's becoming gentrified. Positives and negatives for urban renewal and gentrification. Gentrification is often criticized because of some of these negative consequences. Before we get there, let's look at some positives. So improved housing, increased property values, increased tax revenues, new businesses and investors, more economic growth and more jobs, infrastructure improvements like sidewalks, schools, Wi-Fi, roads, bike lanes, things like that. Rehabilitation of historic buildings, so being able to preserve that and maintain some of that unique urban landscape. And then also crime rates tend to decrease. Negative consequences, and this is like a practice that is kind of seen as negative overall. The displacement of longtime residents in locations that are typically elderly people, minority groups, or just like impoverished groups. This can cause homelessness and social tensions. So like I mentioned, areas that were seen as undesirable or poor or too like ethnic are then people that have lived there for a long time, for maybe even their whole lives, are then unable to afford to live there anymore. Rent goes up, taxes go up. Even if they own their properties, they can be pushed out of that area because of rising property taxes. And also there's always that temptation of developers coming in, offering to buy their property for more than what it's worth. And then, those people end up getting pushed out and the whole makeup of the neighborhood changes. So that is probably the biggest and the main consequence and criticism of gentrification. So conflicts over change. So we have functional and geographic fragmentation of government. So different stakeholders have different wants and desires. So school boards, local residents, developers, neighborhood groups, they all have their own opinions. They have their own perspectives on how to address some of these urban challenges. It's hard to make changes when there's a lot of different voices and no consensus. So it's difficult for governments at different levels to be able to act on these challenges.